Today we're going to be learning Beitzah Daf Lamed Tet. We are almost at the end of the Masechet. One more day. We will be finishing at the Siyum Be'ezrat Hashem on Sunday. Hope you're all joining us. And if you're not, the Shiur will be up later than usual. It will go up after the Siyum is over. The Siyum again will be at 7 p.m. And sometime later that evening, we will put the Siyum up online, both the audio, the podcast, and the video. Okay, today's daf. This is the daf for Shabbat. Today's daf is sponsored anonymously in memory of Rav Ovadia Yosef ben Yaakov. Okay, we're going to start at line number 3 on today's daf. Rabbi Yehuda poter b'mayim. If you remember, we were discussing how far we could take certain items. So let's say I borrow food to make a dough with. I borrow your salt and your water and your spices. I want to make something out of it. It ends up with ingredients of mine and ingredients of yours. I borrowed them on Yom Tov. So since your ingredients can only go as far as you can go and my ingredients can only go as far as I can go, so only where it overlaps, then I'm allowed to take those, that dough. So now the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda poter b'mayim, but Rabbi Yehuda said, if you remember, this was from the Mishnah, water is not the same as everything else because water doesn't really have any significance to it. It's just water, and you don't really feel the water in the batter. So now the Gemara says, "Ma'im in melach lo." It sounds like he only disagrees about the water because Tanakama said water, yes, was going to be part of it. Water, spices, salt. Right? Rabbi Yehuda says, no, water's not on that list. Water doesn't count. So now you can infer water, yes, salt, no, meaning salt. Still, you would be limited to wherever her salt could go and yours, in your batter. Tanya, but wait, doesn't it say in a Beitzah, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Mayim v'melach b'telin, bein b'isa, bein b'kdera? Doesn't Rabbi Yehuda say in a Beitzah that water and salt are nullified in a mixture, whether it's a batter, whether it's cooking, it doesn't matter, it gets nullified. So if it's nullified, then it shouldn't be considered here, shouldn't be relevant. So lo kashya haba melech stomit, haba melech istrokanit. Okay, there's a debate about what exactly the etymology of the word istrokanit is. It's the name of a place, possibly. In any case, it's a type of salt that's much coarser and more stronger, more potent. So the salt that's much more noticed in the batter, that's going to be our Mishnah, where Rabbi Yehuda is going to say what the salt, right, does matter. It's going to limit how far she can take it. Whereas in this other Beitzah, where he said they're nullified into a dough, there we're going to assume that salt that's the melach stomi, which was the more normal salt that came from stone. Another question against Rabbi Yehuda. Bahatanya, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, mayim v'melach b'telim b'isa ve'ein b'telim b'kdera mipnei rotba. Here it says that water and salt are nullified into a batter, but they're not nullified into a pot. Okay, that's the right here. Okay, this is a bit of a contradiction, both those Beitzot against each other and what he says in our Mishnah. So here we have water is nullified in an isa, but it's not nullified into a pot. So how can you explain that? So we say, right, then we say, and first of all, in the earlier Beitzah, he said, Mayim v'melach are b'telim, even in a kdera, and also our Mishnah seemed to say that the mayim is nullified. So now we say, Lo kashya ha'ba'ava ha'baraka. It depends how thick the sauce was. If you have a very thick sauce, then there's not a lot of water in it, and the water, again, is not noticed. If you have a very thin, softer kind of dough, then you're going to have a lot of water noticed in there, and then the water is going to be significant. And that's the last Beitzah we quoted, where he says it's not nullified in a pot. New Mishnah. Hagachelet, we're now going to talk about coals and a flame. Okay, and we're going to compare the two for all sorts of halachot. Our Mishnah is going to mention 3. We're then going to quote a Beitzah where it mentions 5 differences. Okay, so now let's start. So a coal, if you give your coal to somebody else, it's going to go by, if you had at the beginning of Yom Tov, as far as you can walk. If you have a shalhevet, you pass someone a flame, that's going to be b'chol makom. It's going to go, it doesn't have any sort of boundary. Even the person who takes it, no matter what, it doesn't have any boundaries whatsoever because it's not really anything. A flame is not something with substance. Gachelet shel hekdesh, another difference between a gachelet, a coal, and a flame. Gachelet shel hekdesh mo'alim bo. If you use a gachelet that belonged to the Beit HaMikdash, then you're liable, right? You used it by accident. You're liable for laws of me'ila, which is accidental misuse of consecrated property. You have to pay back the value, an additional fifth, and you have to bring a sacrifice. So that's when it's a kol, when it's something real. But shalhevet, but a flame, lo nehenim v'lo mo'alim. On the one hand, you can't benefit from it, but there's no laws of me'ilah because by Torah law, this is not significant. The rabbis, however, forbade it. We're going to get back to that later, why they forbade it. Hamotzi gachelet l'reshut harabim chayav. V'shalhevet patur. Third law, okay, we had the coals and the flames as it relates to tchumin, how far you could take them. We had the laws, how they relate to hekdesh, sanctified items. And then we had the law and laws of Be'ilah. And now we're going to have carrying. On Shabbat, you're liable for carrying out an object from the public into the private, or vice versa. And we say, hamotzi gachelet l'reshut harabim chayav. So if you take out a coal, you're going to be liable. But shalhevet patul. But again, if you take out a flame, you're not going to be liable for that. So the Gemara, as I said, is going to bring a bright. Tanu Rabbanan. Okay, we learn in the following source. There's 5 laws about a gachelet, which really means a coal versus a flame. So again, laws of tchumin. The gachelet goes by the legs. It goes as far as the owner can go. If you pass it even to somebody else, it goes by the original owner. When Yantiv started, shalhevet can go anywhere. It has no limitation. Gachelet shel hekdesh mo'alim ba, v'shalhevet lo neheni v'lo mo'alim. The hekdesh, there's me'ilah for the gachelet. There is no me'ilah for shalhevet, even though it does happen to be forbidden by rabbinic law. Gachelet shel avodah zara asura, v'shalhevet muteret. When it comes to a coal of avodah zara, you can't use it at all. It's forbidden because you're not allowed to use things that were for idol worship. But a shalhevet, a flame, is no problem. Hamotzi gachelet, and by the way, there's a good note in the Koran which talks about the fact that even though it's muteret, you can use it, you shouldn't use it for havdalah, okay, because that's a kiyum mitzvah. You shouldn't use it if it was used for avodah zarah, okay, but there's no real forbidden, it's not really forbidden in general to benefit from it. Hamotzi gachelet l'reshut harabim chayav, v'shalhevet patur. Again, laws of carrying from domain to domain. If it's a gachelet, you're chayav. If it's a shalhevet, you're exempt. Hamudal hana'an, here's the 5th, this one also we didn't have in the Mishnah. Hamudal hana'an mechavero. If you say, I am making a vow, I'm not going to benefit from anything of yours. So you can't use their gachelet, but you can, mutar b'shal hafto, you can use his flame. Because again, it's not really significant. It doesn't have substance, it's not real. It's real, but it's not something with substance. So now the Gemara asks about the shalhevet and the me'ilah, the hekdesh. Why, when it came to a shalhevet avodah zarah, we said you can use it, even though I did point out this thing about havdalah, but generally you can get benefit from it. It's not a problem. But what about hekdesh, which is forbidden? So why is there this distinction? Right? When it comes to hekdesh, you can't do it by rabbinic law, but by avodah zarah, you can use it. So they say the following. Avodah zarah, okay, let's try to take that example of havdalah. Okay, so avodah zarah de mi'isa ubedile inashe mina lo gazru ba rabbanan. Avodah zarah, which is really despicable, right? You wouldn't ubedile inashe mina. You're not going to want to use it. Okay, I gave this example of havdalah and trying to take a flame that was used for avodah zarah, right? Try to imagine yourself. Would you take, if there's a guy doing idol worship right next to you, say you're out in the Far East traveling, and you see a guy using a flame for his idol worship? Could you imagine yourself going over to him and saying, hey, can I use your candle? I need to make havdalah, right? You'd be like, I'm not going near that guy's flame, right? That's bedile and ashemine. People separate from it. They're going to say, it's avodah zarah. I'm definitely not using that, right? Whether it's for your mitzvah of havdalah or anything really, you're not going to really want to use it. Therefore, there was no reason that the rabbis needed to make a gzerah. The rabbis forbid things that we're worried you might actually use. So hekdesh, but if somebody sanctified the shalhevet to the temple, then people aren't going to be scared of it and say, oh, I want to keep away from it. And that's why the rabbis said, well, we don't want you using it because better not to use something that was sanctified, even though it might not have real substance. But if we allow that, maybe people will use other things. So better to make a gzerah. Again, this is a case where if there's an unlikely scenario, then the rabbis didn't really make a gzerah about it. Now we're going to talk about laws of taking out from one domain to the other with the shalhevet and the gachelet. V'hatanya, but wait, doesn't it say in a Beitzah? Hamotzi shalhevet koshu chayav. It says if you take out any sort of small amount of a flame, you're liable. That goes directly against what our Mishnah says. So, Amarav Sheshet Chigon Shitzio B'Kesam. It's where you had a wood chip and the shalhevet was attached to the wood chip. So then you're liable because you carried out this wood chip with a fire on it. To which the Gemara says, well, then B'Tepukle Mishum Kesam. It's the wood chip that you're liable for, not the flame. So you should say, if you take out a wood chip, you're liable. So they say B'Delele Shiura. It's a case where you don't have enough of a shiur of the fire, of the wood chip to be liable. Then the combination of having this very small wood chip, which normally you wouldn't be liable for. If you remember, we learned about laws of carrying on Shabbat. We learned that it has to be a certain size. It has to have significance. Otherwise, your action, if you carried out a little teeny something that has no use whatsoever, you're not liable because that's not a creative action. You're not doing anything at all. It's true, you carried something, but it's nothing. So therefore, they say it must be the wood chip was too small. It really had no use. However, because it had the flame attached to it, that already made it significant, and therefore we have something of substance. The flame makes the size not an issue because it then kind of makes it as if it's more important, and then you'll be liable. What's the size for a wood chip? Ditnan, as it says in the Mishnah, in Masechet Shabbat, hamutzi etzim kedei levashel beitzah kala. It's the amount of wood that you would need to make a fire to cook an egg, okay, to lightly cook an egg. Abai Amal, he's going to give a different example. Kigon de shaifa mana mishcha. You put oil on a utensil, on a kli, a vessel, va'at lebei nura, and you lit it up on fire. So then you have a kli, and it's because of the kli, it's the utensil that you're liable for, not the fire. So again, the Gemara says, well, then v'tepukle mishumana, you should say it's because it's a kli. So they say it's bechaspa. It could be like a broken shard. So they say v'tepukle mishum chaspa. Even that there's liability for. B'delei la shiura. It's a case where you didn't have a sizable enough piece. Titnan cheres kedei litain ben patzim lechavero. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. He says, what's the size of cheres that you could put in between the windows? Okay, they would stick like little chips in or little pieces of broken shards to kind of keep things in place in the window or balance things, lift something. Rashi has a bit of a description, but it wasn't clear to me 100% exactly how these were used and what the reality was, but they would use them somehow in windows or walls to prop things up maybe. So that's the size. And here we're talking about you had less of a size than that, but yet there was this flame on it. So because of that, again, you're going to be liable. But now we go back to a basic question, which is, how could you possibly have, if you're going to say if it's attached to a wood chip, you're liable. If it's attached to a shard, you're liable. So then when are you going to have a case like our Mishnah where the shalhevet is exempt for carrying? Flame is always attached to something. So they say not necessarily. Kigon da'adye aduye l'reshut harabim. It's a case where you fanned the fire and you kind of pushed a flame over into reshut harabim kind of on its own. Again, a little hard to understand the reality, but you kind of flung this fire over into the reshut harabim. In that case, you would not be liable on yantif because a shalhevet doesn't really have any sort of substance, right? You know what's going to happen. It's kind of going to go out also. And then you have a worry that you really caused something to extinguish, which is a separate problem. They don't seem to be worried about that. Okay, Mishnah. I'm not sure why. Maybe they're just not mentioning it because that's not our topic here. New Mishnah. Bor shel yachid. Now we're going to talk about a cistern where you want to take water out of it. So if it's an individual's, kiraglei yachid, it goes by the individual. Shel anshe otah ha'ir, if it belonged to the city, kiraglei anshe otah ha'ir, and it has the limits of the inhabitants of the city. V'shel olei Bavel, now the Babylonians would go on Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael on the holidays and other times. So it says here, not everybody went, but there were times where people went, and they made these cisterns along the way for the people who go on Aliyah and need water along the way. So the ones that belong to those people go kiraglei memale, goes by the person who fills it up. Okay, if you fill it up, you take water out of there, it goes by however far you can walk. Okay, we're going to talk about this soon, right? It seems to be ownerless. Okay, we're going to have to see exactly how this works. Rami le Rava le Rav Nachman. So first Rava asks the question of Rav Nachman. We're going to see that Rava answers him, not Rabba with a hey, not Rava with an aleph. And Rav Nachman doesn't answer the question, but Rava does. Rava says to Rav Nachman, Tanan, it says in our Mishnah, Bor she'yachid kiraglei yachid, plus I think he really means all the cases, right, including the Olei Bavel, like Raglei Memale, Uriminu. But it says, Naharot hamoshchin u'mayanot hanovim harei hen kiraglei kol adam. says there, this is in the Tosefta, it says if you have these streams going through, they go by everybody. And we're assuming that these cisterns maybe were also getting water from the streams. So therefore, how could it be that these are limited, either an individual just to that person, or the city to the city, and Olei Bavel to according to the one who fills it? It says here that water that's streaming basically belongs to nobody, okay? It's because it's always streaming, right? And you don't know where this was at the beginning of Shabbat or Yantif, and therefore they go by Kol Adam. What does this mean, Kol Adam? So if you look in Rashi, he says, Ein lahem shum shvita, lo b'mkoman, v'lo b'raglei ha'ba'alim, v'lo b'raglei ha'memaleh. Ela Kol Adam molicham b'raglav, dekol midi dinai le shvita. It's basically considered an item that doesn't have any rest, in which case, if it doesn't have any rest, no Tchum laws apply to it at all. So Amar Rabba, to answer this question, he says, when we talked about these cisterns, we talked about water that's collected in the cistern, not coming from some sort of stream. And it was also said, Amar Bichia bar Avin, Amar Shmuel b'mechunasim. That's the situation. So now we're going to get into a whole long thing. Itma. We're going to bring a machloket, Rav Nachman and Rav Sheshet, and then we're going to try to figure out what's the root of their machloket. We're going to bring one explanation. We're going to eventually reject it, and then we're going to bring another one, and that's going to be our answer. So let's go. Mileh v'natan lechavero. If I fill up water from the cistern of the Olei Bavel, okay, which doesn't belong to anyone, when I fill it up, it's supposed to go by me. But what if I fill it up with the intent of bringing it to you? Does it go by you or does it go by me? So Rav Nachman Amar kiraglei mishenit malulo. It goes by you because I filled it up for you. So it goes by your boundaries. Rav Sheshet Amar kiraglei memaleh. It goes by the one who filled it up, me. So when my kamiflige, what's the root of this machloket? Mar savar beira de hefkerahu. Rav Nachman said, Rav Sheshet says, it's hefker. What does it mean it's hefker? And how do we view this Olei Bavel? They built these cisterns for all the people going up from Babylonia to Israel. Are they ownerless? That's what Rav Sheshet says. They're ownerless. What's the relevance? If they're ownerless, if I basically take it from you, okay, then I basically acquire, okay, here's an interesting thing about hefker. I can't acquire hefker for you. If something is ownerless, I can go take it for myself, but I can't take it from you. Okay, here's the best example. You go to park your car. You're in a busy area. You get to this place, you find a spot. You're so excited. I found a parking spot. What happens? A minute later, you realize there's someone standing in the parking spot, saving the spot for somebody else, right? How often does that happen to you and you get really annoyed? I don't know if it happens so much abroad, but it definitely happens in Israel. Very Israeli. So someone's standing in that spot, saving it. Now you say, that's totally not legit. Why is it not legit? Theoretically, they got there first, but they're saving it for somebody else. That's not the way the rules work. This is open street. Whoever comes first gets the spot. It's unfair that they take the spot and are holding it for someone who's not even there yet. I'll give you another example. You're sitting in shul, saving a spot for someone, okay? Shul starts filling up. There's no more room in the shul. And you've got that spot you're saving for your mother, for your daughter, okay? And you're saving that spot and you're not letting go of it. Is that fair or not fair? Because again, shul functions on a first come, first served basis. So you come, you get your seat. Someone else, right? I'm not talking about a place where there's assigned seats. I'm talking about where there's open seating. So is it fair to save that seat? Because really, this is an open game, right? It's a little bit unfair to save that. It's true, you got there first, but your mother isn't there yet, or your daughter isn't there yet. So these are good examples to think about when you're thinking about this situation. So that's the reason why he says, since he views it as hefker, since it's hefker, I can't take it for you. I can only take it for myself. So, well, it's true, I'm taking it for you. Really, I get ownership rights for me and not for you because it's really mine. I can't acquire it for you. The law doesn't allow me to. Right? That's a little one step farther than the parking spot, or right? The law says you're not allowed to. So if you do take it for someone else, it's not actually for someone else, it's for you. That's where the comparison falls a little short because it's not really the same kind of thing. But the question is, who owns it right now? Now we have Umar Savar, Rav Nachman, what does he hold? And he's the one we're going to deal with for a while now. We all pay taxes, let's say, for this board to be built. So therefore, to a certain extent, we all have ownership rights to it. It's owned by all the Babylonians, let's say. So therefore, we all partly own it. If we all partly own it, then if it's something partly owned, I can acquire it on behalf of somebody else. It's only from Hefker that I can't. Otherwise, generally, we have a principle, Zachin la'adam shelo b'fanav. By the way, one thing I neglected to mention, which is a really important point, I think it was illustrated, but I didn't spell it out explicitly, which is, in the other opinion, where it's Hefker, what's the problem? Hefker is ownerless, which means anyone can get it. If I take it for you, I'm basically stealing it from somebody else. If I take it for myself, I'm allowed to, but if I take it for someone else, it's almost like taking away the opportunity for someone else. That's why also the parking spot, right? You took my chance, or the seat in shul. You ruined it for somebody else who could have gotten it. But where it's shutafut, then I'm allowed, in general, I can do something good for someone else. I'm not cheating someone else out of it. So if I take something that's owned by partnership, I can decide I'm going to acquire a part of it and give it for somebody else. No problem. That's why Rav Nachman says it goes by the person who I filled it up for him, because it works in that case. So here comes the question. It'll take a little while to understand the question. So let's first see the beginning cases. We're going to quote a Tanaitic source. Hareini alecha cherem. If I say you're going to be cherem to me, okay, I will be cherem to you. Hareini alecha cherem. So hamudar asur, that means I am not letting you benefit of anything of mine. You're going to be cherem means you're forbidden. You're forbidden to access anything of mine. If I say that, you're forbidden to take anything of mine. Hare ata alai cherem. If I say you're going to be cherem for me, that means I'm forbidding myself to benefit from your stuff. Hanoder asur. So the person who made the neder, the vow, I'm forbidden to use your stuff. Hareini alecha va'ata alai. This is the important case. If I say you're forbidden, you're cherem to me, and I'm cherem to you, shnehem asurim zeh b'zeh. They're each forbidden to each other. Umutarim b'shel ole bavel. However, what are we permitted to benefit from? Even though we can't benefit from anything each of us owns, we can benefit from the Ole Bavel. What does that show? Ole Bavel is not owned in partnership, because if it was owned in partnership, we wouldn't be able to. We're going to see that in a minute. However, they can't benefit from anything that's part of their city. So now let's just get an example of what these are. Harabayit, okay, the Temple Mount, Halishakot, the rooms there, and the Azarot, and the big areas there, right? The Azara, we always talk about the Azara there. Ubor shel emtza derech, and a cistern that's in the middle of the road. Ve'elu hen shalot ha'ir, what's considered belonging to the city that we can't benefit from. If we say, I won't benefit from you, and you won't benefit from me. Harechov, the street, we're not going to be in a good situation. We can't walk on the streets of the city. Beit HaKnesset, the shul. Oh, this is interesting in light of what I said before. This would distinguish between the parking spot, which is maybe public, although maybe you'll say the parking spot is also partially owned. I don't know. Maybe it's like the city, but let's just assume. And the shul is basically something we all own, right? Imagine if you're a member of the shul. So let's go back to that story. I'm sitting in my seat. I'm saving a seat. Now I'll say, hey, it's legit. I paid membership here. You might say, even if you didn't pay membership, it doesn't certainly talk about membership here. But the concept is the shul is jointly owned by everybody. So theoretically, maybe I do have rights to save it for somebody who's not there. Okay? Ubeit HaMerchatz and the bathhouse. Those are considered otai. In this case, where you vowed never to get benefit from the other person and they can't benefit from you, neither of them can use any of these things because they're jointly owned. Now, why should it be permitted if the bor of Olei Regalim is b'shutfut, is partnership? Because it says, Hatznan, it says in the Mishnah in Nidarim, Hashutafim shenadru hana'azem mizeh. That's a Masechet that deals with vows. Hashutafim shenadru hana'azem mizeh. If you have two partners who are part owners of something, and they forbade each other to benefit from the other, asurim likanes l'chatzer. They can't go into the courtyard. They can't use anything that's jointly owned, even though they each own half. Doesn't matter. The other person owns the other half, and they're not allowed to benefit. So likewise, they shouldn't be able to use the bor if the bor was b'shutfut. So this goes against Rav Nachman, who tried to say the bor was jointly owned. To which the Gemara says, L'rchotz b'bor hachanami. There's two l'rchotzes here. Most of the people say get rid of one, the second one. To go rinse yourself off in the bor for sure is going to be a problem because it's jointly owned. However, hacha b'mayaskinan, in which case did they say the bor is permitted? L'malot. It's when you want to fill up water from the bor. That's the case we were discussing from the beginning. Mar midide kamimale, umar midide kamimale. It's true they own this cistern. It's joint. That's what Rav Nachman says. It's all joint ownership. However, when you take the water out, laws of Brera that we just discussed, retroactively, it becomes that this water that I took out is mine and the water that you took out is yours. And therefore, I'm not actually benefiting from you. If I go in the water to wash off, I'm actually using all the water. Then it'll be a problem. But if I take out my own water, that water is fair and square, my water. That's how we explain Rav Nachman. Okay? So Rav Nachman now, let's go back to the beginning. We had this case of Ole Haregel, Ole Bavel. If you take water from there, it goes by the legs of the person who you filled it up for, because I'm allowed to take from, or we're going to say, this is shutafut, not hefker, according to Rav Nachman, and I'm allowed to take from something jointly owned and give to you, okay? Because, right, it doesn't contradict what we said about shutafut that we just said a minute ago, that Ole Bavel, right, is considered, we tried to say maybe it's not shutfut, because if it was shutfut, then you wouldn't be able to benefit if you owned it b'shutafut and you forbade to get benefit from each other. We say, no. Don't worry about that case. That case works on this principle of brera. As soon as I take my water out, that's my water. That was your water. I didn't benefit from your water at all. To which the Gemara says, wait a minute. This is going to remind us of what we saw 2 dapim ago. V'savar Rav Nachman yesh brera, also in yesterday's stuff, right? Where we keep questioning, does he really hold brera? Though it's very nice to try to explain his opinion by saying the only way it's going to work is if he holds brera, but he doesn't hold brera because we know from a different source that he doesn't. The Hatznan, it says in a Mishnah, Ha'achim shutafim. We now have brothers who inherited a property or their father's whole inheritance, and then they divided it up. I get this, you get that, done. Then they decided we want to go back and be together, and they brought all their money back together and they lived together, or they put their possessions together. Financially, they had a financial agreement that we're together. That's achim hashutafim. They're achim that inherited, split up, and then got back together. Now, or maybe not. Maybe they never split it up in the first place, and they just said from the beginning, we're going to be together. So now it depends how they did it is going to affect certain halachot. Okay, I'll give you some background. 2 halachot you need to know. One is kalbon. We're going to quote a Mishnah in Shkalim now, so it's good chazara, Masechet Shkalim if you learned it, which is when they had to bring the machatzira shekel to the temple, they were supposed to add shkalim, half shekels were not good coins to carry. They always transfer them into bigger coins. So when you do it, you have to pay like a commission fee, like a transfer fee, because you're making them transfer your money. So you have to pay the money, the people who change money, the money changers. So you have to pay your own. What if 2 people get together and give a whole shekel and then you don't need the money exchange? Well, they still have to pay their own kalbon because they're considered separate people. However, if it's a father and his sons, assuming the sons are older and are obligated, and the father gives on behalf of all of them, then that's viewed, you don't have to give the kalbon for each of them, okay? Because it's considered one household. Next laws are maaser behema. Maaser behema is you have to take 1/10 of all your animals that are born that year. They do it a few times a year. We'll get into all this much later. Sechet bechorot. And there we learn that because it says by bechor, we're going to learn the same halacha is going to be true for maaser behema. It says, kol peter sheger behema, the first of your animals, asher yihiyeh lecha, that will be for you, singular. They say below shel shutfut. The drasha is not if you own it in partnership. And then they say, we don't really need to tell you this for bechor, so we're going to learn it to maaser, to the 10th. So now, ha'achim hashutafim k'shechayavim bekalbon pturim mimaaser behema. If they're partners in such a way that they're liable, they're obligated to bring the kalbon because they're considered 2 separate, which means they split up the inheritance and then got back together, which means their partnership is now like a regular partnership of 2 random people, not that it's all one household. They'll be obligated in kalbon, but they'll be exempt from maaser behema because maaser behema is all based on not, you have to be the sole owner. But if they view this all, it's called tfusat habayit, where the house is just one big house, we're all together, and they never split it up in the first place, and it was all just the inheritance of the father, so they're basically continuing their father's estate. If that's the case, then they're chayavim b'maaser behema, and they'll be pturim in a kalbon, because the kalbon doesn't apply to a household, and this is a household, as opposed to a partnership. But when it comes to maaser behema, it's one household, so they'll be obligated to bring the maaser behema. Not yet the point yet. ואמר רב ענן, לא שנו אלא שחלקו גדיים כנגד תלאים ותלאים כנגד גדיים. This is only if they took sheep for lambs and lambs for sheep. That means when they divided it in the first place, in the first case, they divided it and then got back together. If they divided, I said, I'm going to take 50 lambs and you take 50 sheep, or the value, 50 shekels worth of lambs and you're going to take 50 shekels worth of sheep. Then we're going to say that when it goes back and they become partners again, it's like a new partnership. However, but if we split exactly 50-50, you got half the lambs and I got half the lambs. You got half the sheep, I got half the sheep. You got half of the beds, I got half the beds. Split everything exactly down the middle. And then we got back together. We basically say when you're back together, it's as if you never really split it, because the dividing wasn't really some unique dividing that you now have to overcome. No, we just go back to saying half was yours, half was mine. Oh, we're all together. And therefore it reverts right back. That works on the principle of Breira, because we say there was as if from the beginning you had, those were yours and those were yours, and therefore you're just going back to the original state. Comes Rav Nachman and disagrees because he doesn't hold by Breira. Rav Nachman amar afilu chalku gdiyim keneged gdiyim utlaim keneged tlaim. Ein omer zechalko migiyom mishana v'shana lekach. You don't say that because there is no Breira. It goes from now. We split it, then we got back together. At each stage, we don't go back and say, oh, retroactively, it was clear that we really were together from the beginning. So therefore, you see, he doesn't hold Breira. Therefore, you can't explain the shutfut case with the mudar hana'ah, with the case where they forbade to eat, with to benefit from each other, and the olei bavel case. It must be olei bavel is not a case of shutfut, because if it was shutfut, they wouldn't be able to drink the water, and they are allowed to have the water from the olei bavel, which the only way we explained it was by Breira, that I took my half and then it became mine. But according to Rav Nachman, who doesn't know Breira and thinks it's shutfut, it doesn't work. So that can't be the reason. So remember, the whole thing was we thought that he must hold shutfut versus hefker. Can't be, so we're going to give a different explanation. Really, a bor is hefker. Everyone agrees the bor is hefker. And that is the only way to explain it, because otherwise the olei bavel sugya with at the top of this amud doesn't work about the olei bavel and the mudar hana'ah. Doesn't make any sense. So you have to say it's hefker. It doesn't belong to anybody. And that's why, if it doesn't belong to anyone, that's why you can drink the water, even though you're forbidden to benefit from that person's stuff. This isn't that person's stuff. This stuff is ownerless. But, elahacha, so what's the machloket then? Again, what's the machloket? Does it go by, when you take this water out of the well out of the cistern for somebody else, does it go by you? That's Rav Sheshet. Or does it go by as far as the person who you're getting it for can walk, his tchum or her tchum? So machloket is about, if I pick up, very similar to the case of the shul or this, but a little bit different. If I pick up a lost item on the street for you, I find something lost, a lost item that has no marking on it, no bearing, and there's no way I'm going to find its owner. It's kind of lost item that I'm allowed to take. We'll get into that in Bava Metzia, where we talk about which Metziot you can take and which ones you can't. You have to announce and return. But assuming I don't have to return it, I take this. What happens? I pick it up, but for you, I have in mind, I want it to be for you. So again, we have this concept, Zachin la'adam shelo b'fanav. You can do something good for someone, even though they're not there and don't know about it. However, and then it can be technically theirs the moment I pick it up. In this case, it's like the parking spot, though. You're basically taking it for someone else right? It's unfair. Take it, if you're going to take it for yourself. Don't take it for someone else. Well, you're ruining the chance of someone else of picking it up. Same idea. Everyone agrees that if you find a mitzvah on the street and you pick it up, you can't take it for somebody else. But the question is, what if I do it anyway? If I pick it up, and now my intent is for you. The question is, I can't acquire it for you. Do I acquire it anyway for me? Because I lifted it and I did a kinyan, so to speak. Or do we say, no, I can only acquire something for myself if I intend for it to be for myself. If I lifted it for you, there's no actual, I didn't acquire it. So it's not mine. In which case, when would it be owned by someone? When I give it to you physically. I give it to you, then it becomes yours. So let's take this water. If I pick up this water, it's hefker. I pick it up for you. Do I acquire it when I pick it up? In which case it'll go like by my feet. That's Rav Nachman. My tchum. Comes Rav Nachman and he says, no. When you lift it, you don't actually acquire anything. It only becomes acquired to the person when I give it to that person. Therefore, it goes by that person's tchum when they receive the item. So that's the machloka between them and not what we thought before. So mar savar kana, umar savar lo kana, right? So Rav Nachman thinks you don't acquire it. So because you don't acquire it, it's going to go by the new person, right? The person I got it for when he acquires it. Rav Sheshet says you did acquire it. So therefore it's mine. It goes by my limit. So when I give it to you, it's subject to my Tchum Shabbos limits. Okay, next Mishnah. We're going to start this Mishnah today. We'll continue from here from the Siyam on Sunday. Reminding everyone, if you haven't registered, please register. At this point, the Zoom link will be you'll get the Zoom link at the end of your registration. We're not sending out further emails with the Zoom link. So if you're listening to this now and you're registering now, at the end of registration process, you will get your Zoom link. Okay, if your fruits were in a different city, actually, I think I just made a mistake. That's only for the Hebrew Siyum. The English Siyum, the registration is different. It's through Zoom. So you'll get the email from Zoom. So my mistake. That was for the Hebrew. The English, you'll get the Zoom automatically. As soon as you register, you get an email telling you that you've registered. I'll just remind you the Siyum's at 8:30. So make sure to be there. If my fruits were in a different city, let's say it's outside my tchum, but the people in that city put up an eruv tchumin so that they could bring my fruits to me. No can do. Lo yavihu lo, because those fruits are mine, but they're not in my tchum, so I can't access them on Shabbos, so they can't bring them to me, or Yantif. Actually, Yantif, because Shabbos, you wouldn't be able to carry them anyway. Yantif, at least you could carry them, but no, because they're outside of tchum. But if I made an eruv, and then my fruits are within 2,000 amot of my eruv, then the fruits were already within my eruv. I could actually access them in Yom Tov, and they could bring them to me. Okay. With that, we will finish for today. We'll continue this Mishnah and finish up the Masechet Bezrat Hashem on Sunday, whatever time of day it is for you. Wishing you all a Shabbat Shalom or Shavua Tov.